the fight song for the UConn Huskies, and this is the Rush the Court Podblast, American Athletic Conference Preview Edition. I'm your podcast host. Alongside me, as always, is my podcast partner, Randy. And joining us from the AAC microsite is Mike Lemaire. Mike, thanks for coming back on the podcast.
Of course, guys. Pleasure to be back.
Well, Mike, we start with UConn. And, of course, they are the reigning national champions and bringing some extra credibility to this conference that, is in a period of transition. Before we get to UConn, Mike, let's do a quick quiz. Who is in the American Athletic Conference for basketball this coming season?
Okay, ready? I've got it. I think I can do all 11. I think we'll start at the bottom. There's Tulane. There's East Carolina. There's South Florida. There's Houston, there's Temple, there's SMU, there's UConn, there's Memphis, there's Cincinnati, and I think I'm missing one. I am missing one? Oh, God, now let me go back.
Another three-letter team. There's too many three-letter teams in this.
Oh, and Central Florida, of course, yeah. UCF, almost. So there you go. I struggle with it, and I've been staring at their conference for the last 2 weeks.
So, goes to illustrate, this conference could use a little boost in the credibility department, and UConn certainly delivered it last March and early April, winning the conference. But now we are into a new season, Mike, and we get into UConn, and as we have, the media day was just a couple days ago as we record now. UConn is the preseason favorite, even though obviously some very key pieces from that team last year are gone. Obviously Napier, Daniels, Giffey, but still a very solid squad coming back here for UConn. Do they deserve to be the preseason favorite in the AAC this year?
Yeah, I think they do. I think not only because SMU still has a lot to prove, even though they may be deeper on paper, but also because, yes, of course, they're going to miss Shabazz Napier. He was their heart and soul of their team as well as their best player. They're also going to miss Daniels and Giffey. But they have plenty of pieces coming back. Ryan Boatright was an excellent player. I think Amida Brahma is only going to be better as a sophomore. Rodney Purvis was a stud recruit coming out of high school. And, Kevin Ollie referred to him as the Ferrari that he can't drive in his garage last year. And I think you'll see a fair amount of that. And then there's also guys like Sam Cassell Jr. and freshman Daniel Hamilton from Los Angeles, who's been much hyped. Yeah, I think there's a lot of pieces left for them to be the team to beat again, especially because SMU hasn't really answered any of the questions yet.
Yeah, Mike, I'm with you on that. I was a little surprised when the Americans coaches poll came out and Connecticut had received 6 of the 11 first-place votes and SMU the other 5, and in the overall, it was basically they were tied at the top. It was a 2-point difference, but it was essentially co-favorites if you want to look at it that way. And, I think back, guys, when the last time the Huskies won the title, 2011, not that long ago, they brought back a bunch of pieces that year as well. They did lose their heart and soul, but they also added a guy by the name of Andre Drummond, if you recall. And they proceeded to turn right around and go 8-10 in the Big East and lose in the first round of the tournament. So, it's hard to say how this team's going to be. I want to really like them again, but I'm not completely sold on them. The heart and soul, man, Shabazz, how can you replace a guy like that, even as good as Ryan Boatright could potentially be as a senior this year, and adding the pieces? I do like Daniel Hamilton a lot, as you said, Mike from Los Angeles, and then Rodney Purvis as well. That's a great backcourt. You have a lot of talent on that perimeter and on that wing, and guys who can get buckets. But I am a little bit worried about the inside play again. I think defensively they'll be solid. I'm worried about them putting the ball in the basket. But when you compare them with SMU, and I can get into this when we talk a little bit more about them, but I do feel like they're a little bit overhyped this year. It's almost like people are not remembering that Emmanuel Mudiay didn't actually make it there.
Well, before we get too much into SMU, just one more thing on UConn, Mike. Now, this might be a totally irrelevant question when it comes to UConn. Do you see them as a factor in a national title picture. And I say irrelevant because UConn has shown us over the last few years with both their titles that it really doesn't matter if they are considered a factor through the season. They are apt to just get hot and win a title or two when it comes to March. But do you see UConn making a run to win back-to-back championships this year, or is this team probably going to be a shade below that level?
Well, I'm the AAC guy, right? So I want people to try to pay attention to my conference, right? So of course I'm going to say they're my preseason favorite to win it all. No, I actually do not think that they are a national title contender. Certainly, like you said, a lot can change between now and March, and a lot can change in March. But like Randy, I think, I really do think Amida Brahma is going to be a stud, but he's still got a lot to learn. He's almost a zero on the offensive end of the floor. And, Tyler Olander's not walking through that door, guys. There's no other guys outside
the white
of Brahma.
Olander.
Exactly right. So there's no other guys really in the front court that can step in and give them minutes. Philip Nolan is obviously a guy I think they're going to count on and who I think can be a contributor, although I have no idea really what to expect from him. But they do have some issues, and like Randy said, anytime you lose a player like Shabazz Napier, they won the NCAA tournament in no small part because of Shabazz Napier just playing on the team, and obviously being the best player in the tournament from start to finish. And so without him, I think they're at least a step below.
That's fair. All right, let's get back into SMU. Obviously, we talked, Randy mentioned it, Emmanuel Mudiay not there. Marcus Kennedy, eligibility questions surrounding him at the moment, but hopefully he'll be able to play this season. Is SMU, despite Mudiay not being there, still right there with UConn in your mind, like they were in the voting for the top team in the league? And is that a clear top two, or does Memphis factor in the race maybe when it's all said and done as well?
Well, I think I'm with Randy again on this one. I think SMU is a little bit overrated. They were a little bit overrated last season, too, when everybody expected them to be a dark horse contender. I know they lost a few pieces during the year. But I think they're slightly overrated. Marcus Kennedy could be the player of the year in this conference, or he could be a guy who can go for 16-10 one night and 5-3 the next night. Nick Moore is a really excellent point guard. I think you'd ask any coach in that league, and they'd love to have him on their team. But he's small. He's a smaller guard. He's not a great defensive guard, obviously, with that size. And I think they do have a lot of depth, and that's why they're up there with UConn, is because they've got guys like Yannick Morera and Keith Frazier coming back, and the transfer from Xavier, Justin Martin, who I think is going to be a huge piece for them as well. So I think they're deeper than UConn at all five positions, and I think that is why a lot of folks have them picked as the better team. But these guys all have lots of question marks about them. Nick Moore is probably their best player. Kennedy's been inconsistent. Morera hasn't stayed out of foul trouble. Frazier didn't live up to his billing. We could go on and on and on with all the things that they were supposed to do or they could do on paper that they haven't actually done. So I do think they're overrated, but I also do agree, or I also do think that UConn and SMU are, at least at this point, a class above everybody else. I know that a lot of people think Memphis might be okay now that Kedron Johnson is eligible, but they need to show me that they can replace more of their backcourt. They lost 4 key guys last year, and they need to prove it. They need to prove they can play before I think anybody's going to consider them in that upper crust.
Can I just make a comment on SMU's head coach, Larry Brown, the venerable, grizzled veteran of coaching at both the NBA and the college level? I can say this because nobody from Kansas is going to be listening to the American. But did you see what happened this week when he went to the Kansas thing? They're celebrating a guy who left them on probation. I'm just saying, apparently that part was forgotten. They won a championship in '88 with a guy named Manning, but he left him on probation. Anyway, Larry Brown. So, Mike, we're in a lot in agreement on this one. SMU on paper appears to have the most talent in the league, and it might be the most balanced team in the league when you talk about what Kennedy, if he can play, brings to the table, what Nick Moore out on the perimeter can do, and then you throw in a Frazier, who I actually do expect him to have a much better season on the wing. But do I trust these guys? That's where I'm not sure. They had every opportunity down the stretch last season. Everybody says they should have gotten in. They were the last team left out. All true things, maybe. But they had their opportunities, and they lost to Houston, right, in the American tournament in that first game, as I recall. So I don't know that I completely trust these guys just yet. At least with UConn, you know that they've been there, they've performed in the postseason, and in stretch down the stretch kind of games where the pressure really is falling on them. I think I'm going to prefer the Huskies in those situations.
Let's look a little bit further down in this conference. So we mentioned Memphis as a potential 3, but still a level below. Mike, what do you think? Memphis, Cincinnati, maybe? Do either of those teams, can you see a scenario where they are challenging for the top spot? And then is there someone further down this list that, maybe could not get to the challenge for the top of the league, but could get in a position where they're looking at a tournament berth at large when March comes around? What teams do you think can maybe jump up a level from where they're projected at right now?
Yeah, I think this is where the conference actually gets really interesting. And by interesting, I mean maybe only to weirdos who study the 3rd and 4th and 5th teams in the AAC. But I think this is really where a lot of questions, there are a ton of questions about some of these teams, and I think that's what's going to make it such an interesting conference, is because it can really go either way. Sure, I think Memphis might have a shot at contending for a league crown. I mean, Shaq Goodwin is a great player. Kedron Johnson was terrific for Vanderbilt. He's a huge get for Josh Pastner to have him eligible this season. Austin Nichols was solid as a freshman. Nick King is another guy who showed flashes as a freshman. Karan Iverson was really highly touted, even though he hasn't been much. If in a perfect world, I do think Memphis can contend. I just, they're another team like SMU that really had every chance last year to prove that they were a great team or a cut above, with that all-veteran backcourt as well as Goodwin and Nichols, and they never really showed it. And now you're telling me that they're going to have to replace almost the entirety of their backcourt and still be able to contend for a league crown. I don't see it. As for the teams that are below them, I guess the disclaimer is that I haven't seen any of the junior college players that Mick Cronin brought in actually play. But it baffles me that people think Cincinnati is going to finish 4th in this conference, at least right now. Maybe it's a testament to Cronin's ability to coach. Maybe it's a testament to the fact that they're always tough defensively. But you talk about a team that was having trouble scoring even when they had Sean Kilpatrick on their roster, and now he's gone and Justin Jackson's gone. It's like, if they break 40 points, they should be getting a standing ovation every night.
Yeah, but Mike, not to jump in, but I mean, we see this every year nationally and on a conference level. There are certain coaches, certain programs that are just going to get a certain level of respect. I mean, last year, no one expected much out of Wisconsin based on their roster necessarily. People still preseason rank them top 25. That one worked. Sometimes it doesn't work out. People also ranked Marquette preseason top 25, just respecting Buzz Williams. That didn't work out. So I think it's just a pure respect play putting Cincinnati and Mick Cronin at the 4 spot.
And I don't know that it's always that you're always wrong to think that way. I mean, we're not saying that they're going to win the league, and maybe all it really requires is someone to drop kick the basketball at the rim on this team, and then have all of this beefy size that he's gotten in there. I mean, his front line is just absolutely beastly right now. And then also, I don't know much about these junior college guys he's got other than that they're big as well. But one of them apparently is related to Monte Ellis, so maybe that guy can actually score in addition to being related to Monte. That guy is a total gunner, as we all know.
For the record, that guy is Octavius Ellis, who was previously on Cincinnati's team.
That's right.
Got in that fight with Xavier. Everybody remembers that. Played a huge role in that, certainly more than he ever played for the Bearcats, and now is back on the team after a year at junior college. Which, I mean, I haven't researched it, but that can't be a very common occurrence.
But by the way, speaking of junior college guys, going back to UConn for a sec, one of my favorite things that may surprise people because he's playing his first, big season in college basketball, or first season in big college basketball, Sam Cassell Jr. is pretty old. It seems like Anthony Davis was in college a million years ago. Sam Cassell Jr. is almost a full year older than Anthony Davis. So I mean, he might have a quicker, adjustment to the big time college game this year. But just speaking of that, and one, we're kind of on individual guys here, Mike. Let's look at another guy in the backcourt for UConn. The preseason player of the year in the AAC is Ryan Boatright, coming off. He was, everyone talks about Napier, but he really reined it. He was a guy who was kind of all over the place a little bit early in his career, but he really reined it in, played in control, played sensational defense in the tournament for UConn. Now preseason player of the year in the American. Does he deserve it? Is he your preseason player of the year? And who else could be in that discussion?
Yeah, I mean, I think he gets it almost by default in this conference, as I wrote about the other day. It's just, there's really no guy that stands out the way the rest of the conferences have guys that stand out. I mean, if you put any of these guys in preseason player of the year discussions in the ACC or the Big 12 or the Big 10, really any of the other conferences, none of these guys would crack the top five. Which is both a blessing and a curse. Again, it gives the league a lot of parity, which will make it interesting to watch. But it doesn't mean that there's a ton of lottery talent necessarily on display, at least not yet anyway. I know that there's some younger guys who might be able to sneak in. I think Boatright does deserve it. I think the only guy who I would pick, and that's with the big disclaimer that he hasn't been consistent yet and he's not eligible yet, is Marcus Kennedy. If he plays a full season, he's the best big man in that league, and it's not even close, really. I mean, if you look at the matchups with Shaq Goodwin last year, Kennedy absolutely obliterated him in both of those games, is a much more athletic, stronger player than Shaq Goodwin, and I don't think that there's really anyone that's going to be better than him. I do think that Boatright is like candidate 1B, and I would not be surprised at all if he wins the award. I think he's going to be the best guard in the league. But I really think it's a toss-up. There could be guys that we haven't thought of. Nick Moore is another candidate. I can see Kedron Johnson if he has a big season. One of the guys we haven't talked about, James Woodard from Tulsa, who had such a huge sophomore season for them. He's back this year. The Golden Hurricane look deep and very good, so he could be a candidate. I know he was picked preseason first team all conference. So really we could run down 25 guys on this list, and really all of them have a viable shot at being player of the year in this conference.
Yeah, I agree with you, Mike. I mean, Ryan Boatright is probably your default guy, certainly from an expected leadership perspective, but he was his stats weren't great. They were 12. He had 12, 3 and 3 last year with 39% from the field. He was okay from three, but certainly not the kind of guy, as you mentioned, that you feel like, oh, this guy is just the best player in the league by far in every possible way. I think it's going to depend on how these teams do, right? You mentioned SMU and Marcus Kennedy. You mentioned Woodard at Tulsa. We haven't really talked much about them entering this league, but I think you're a big fan of them, and as I am as well. Going into this season, even a guy like Kedron Johnson at Memphis. So that's another good one, right? If Memphis actually puts it together this year, he could be their most important player and certainly would be deserving. And then I just want to have a second team, guys. I want a second team of all Shaqs. There's so many Shaqs in this league that I want the entire second team to be full of Shaqs, and no other names are allowed.
I like it. I think we got it. We can bring back a few, right? I mean, we can bring back Shaquille O'Neal for a little while, too.
You mentioned teams, and obviously I got a bone to pick with this league. Maybe last year we could have given them a pass. They were a new league. They didn't know what they were doing yet. Here we are, second year as a league, and we have 6 guys on the preseason all first team. Yeah. You know our rules around here. 5 guys on a team. That's how many guys will play on a court. Now, I'll be fair. This one might take care of itself because Marcus Kennedy is one of them, and if he's not eligible, that might take care of itself. But Boatright, Goodwin, Nichols, Moore, Kennedy, Woodard, those are the 6. narrow it down to 5 from you, Mike? And do you want to kick 2 guys off and put in somebody else altogether?
So I guess Austin Nichols on the first team kind of struck me as an out of nowhere thing. I mean, I know he was a 5-star recruit coming out of high school. He was good last year for Memphis. He was certainly a solid freshman. I think it was 8-5 or something along those lines is what he averaged. So he was a very good player. But first team, I guess I would have said that. I mean, I understand Goodwin. He and Kennedy are both going to be studs. But Nichols is the guy I would kick off almost immediately just because, I mean, if you've got a guy making the first team all conference and he's averaging 9-6, let's say, or, maybe if he gets to double digits and it's 10-6, I guess you can make a case for him. But, I mean, if we're only getting 5, which we should, I agree.
Yeah.
I'm kicking Nichols off the team. Without a doubt, I think he gets bumped down, and I think he might have a tough time making second team all conference in this league. So I was stunned to see him on the first team, definitely.
Oh, well, we go from the players to the coaches because we already had some interesting coaches in this league. Obviously, Ollie and what he was able to do last year in his second year overall, first year eligible for the tournament, winning it all. Obviously, a Hall of Famer, despite what Randy brought up earlier. Larry Brown, still a great Hall of Fame coach. But we had some interesting hires this offseason in the league. Obviously, we had USF. They had their kind of mess trying to hire Steve Masiello from Manhattan, but they ended up with Orlando Antigua, who's was John Calipari's right-hand man for many years. Then we had Tulsa. Now, this is a little questionable, but Tulsa essentially coach stealing from Missouri. Haith might have been avoiding firing, but ultimately not fired, and going over to Tulsa, which was kind of an interesting move. And then maybe most interestingly, we have Kelvin Sampson at Houston. First of all, which is the most intriguing hire to you, and who has the biggest impact this year in the league out of those 3 guys, Mike?
Well, I think that question is really obvious, and the most intriguing is Kelvin Sampson for reasons that I'll get into, and the obvious reasons. I think the one who's going to have the most impact is Frank Haith, which is another thing I'll get into, but I do want to talk about Orlando Antigua for a minute. Obviously, they got a lot of egg on their face with the Masiello debacle down there, and I think Steve Masiello probably would have been a better hire if all of this had gone away than Antigua. I do think that he's going to be able to recruit. I mean, he's already got a few transfers, especially Roddy Peters from our great school over at Maryland. They stole him away. So I do think that he's going to be able to rebuild the team a little bit, but I'm just not sure if he's the guy necessarily that's going to be – he's got a great recruiting track record. Now he's going to have to prove that he can develop players as well. Because say all you want about being able to bring talent to South Florida, but that school is never going to be able to recruit with the best schools in this conference, and he's going to need to develop guys. He's going to need to unearth guys who aren't the obvious players if he's going to want to find continued success here. As for Sampson, I actually really like this hire. I think that Kelvin Sampson certainly deserves another shot in college basketball after something as, we call it a scandal. And back then I remember it being such a huge deal. And now you think about it and it's like, hey, he made like 500 extra phone calls. I get it. But I think he's actually a great hire. Houston was in kind of they're kind of stuck in a rut. James Dickey, to his credit, brought a ton of talent into that program and never did anything with it. They were terrible defensively last year, very mediocre despite having a lot of talent. And I know they dealt with injuries as well. So I do think that'll be interesting. And talking about Sampson gives me the opportunity to say, I hope you guys took a minute to read that feature from ESPN today on Devontae Pollard, who's a former McDonald's All-American, who's now going to Houston, trying to resurrect his career he spent his freshman year at Alabama. Anyway, I won't get into too many of the details, but you guys should all read it. I don't think Houston will be great this year. Tayshaun Thomas is gone. Daniel House is gone as well. LJ Rose is out until December. I think a lot of people don't give LJ Rose as much credit as he deserves. I think he would have been and might still be a very excellent player. So I actually don't think that Houston will be much of anything. But I do think that he is the most intriguing hire just based on his background and the fact that he was a really, really good coach at Oklahoma and was starting to turn Indiana around as well. Obviously left them worse off for wear, but he's a really, really good coach. And I think that he's got a chance to build Houston into a winner. As for Frank Haith, we always got to talk about Frank Haith. Give him credit. He got out of Missouri before, I don't necessarily blame him or Tulsa.
He pulled the Oliver Purnell. Leave before you get fired.
Yeah, I don't think it was
like every job I've ever had.
It's really the right way to do it. We should all be taking notes from Frank Haith, which is the first time you'll hear that and the last time you'll hear that this season. But yeah, give him credit. He ducked out of the Missouri job, and Missouri was kind of tanking after what a wonderful first season he had with Mike Anderson's players. Now he gets all of Danny Manning's players, and all of a sudden he inherits a veteran, talented, excellent team that made the NCAA tournament last year, is switching to a bigger conference and is playing in a conference where, everybody from 3 through 10 has tons of question marks about them. And no one's really talking about how Tulsa was picked to finish 5th. And, they won 20 games last year and made the NCAA tournament. So I think that they are going to be really good this year as long as they can avoid, kind of the Frank Haith sticky goo that just kind of like comes off him, and it makes everybody's in-game decisions worse. But no, I kid. But I think Tulsa's going to be really good this year, and they're potentially better than Memphis or Cincinnati. And we're going to be talking about Frank Haith all of a sudden as a potential Coach of the Year candidate in this conference. So, kudos to him for stepping out of Missouri when the ship was sinking and all of a sudden inheriting another golden goose here,
Mike, I'm with you on Tulsa. I'm totally bought in. I think this is your sleeper team in this league. To the point of, you said 3 through 10 might be open. Again, there's still question marks in my mind with SMU and even UConn. So this is a 21-win team. They went to the NCAA tournament. They had a pretty solid defensive unit, and they were horrific, absolutely horrific on offense. But they still were able to get there. And my feeling on it is Haith has proven he can go to other schools and do well with other people's players. That's clear. But he also can bring a little bit better offense, right? He had the best offense in the country the year he was at Mizzou that first year. And even if you go back to Miami, it was top 50 most years. And I'm saying horrific. They were like on the Ken Pom rankings down in the low 100s, I believe. So
I looked it up today. They were 168th or something like that in offensive efficiency with Danny Manning last year.
A solid improvement up to the 80s or 70s, and keeping a relatively around the same D would probably mean this team is going to be pretty good again with many other pieces coming back. So I think that's your real dark horse, given where the preseason rankings were. They were rated 5th in that league. And they have a lot of good players. You mentioned some sleeper guys. Woodard is on there, but what about a guy like Rashad Smith? I don't think anybody in the league even knows who he is at this point, but they might by the end of the year. And what you're going to get here with this league, and again, going back to what I said about, Boatright's probably like number one of many that could end up as player of the year. But what if a guy like Amita Brima has a great defensive, like kind of masterpiece kind of year and really propels Connecticut into a much better season than many people anticipated? He could be that kind of first teamer that would end up as player of the year, or a Marcus Kennedy if SMU does the same. So I'm just thinking about even a Will Cummings, right? You mentioned he's such a scorer, and let's say he goes from 18 points a game to 24 points a game. Again, it might be that he's just so good as an offensive player that he ends up as player of the year this year. So you might just put 10 people on the second team, nobody on the first at this point, and say, let's battle it out. Let's see who ends up there.
I like it.
Well, before we let you go, Mike, we got to do this again. We did it last year, and it yielded pretty good results. So ultimately, so this is the search for Randy's new favorite team. Last year, Michigan was done. The Michigan era was over. We needed to find him a new team. We found him Iowa State. I'd say, all things considered, that went pretty well, and maybe one George Niang injury away from having another Final Four team. for your favorite team, Randy.
Yep.
It looks like I'm thinking, and I don't mean to offend you, Mike, as the AAC guy here. I don't know that we're going to find your new favorite team in this conference because I think UConn's disqualified. They're a little too good, being the reigning national champs. We know how you feel about Memphis, and you've already said SMU's overrated. So maybe it might be tough to find a team in this conference. But Randy, let's go through again. What are your criteria? Is there anything new that you've added? Any new wrinkles to the favorite team criteria for this year? And then let's see if Mike can find a good nominee for you.
Yeah, well, it's got to be a fun style of play, obviously. We want to enjoy watching my new favorite team. Mm-hmm. So a lot of these defensive, slow it down, they're out of here. I don't want to watch that garbage.
Bye-bye Cincinnati.
Yeah, I wasn't going to say the name. I need a player. I need a player, Mike, that excites me. So somebody that, even if the team isn't playing that well, I'm going to be interested in watching this one particular player. It doesn't have to be an offensive dynamo. He can be a defensive kind of player as well. But they got to have somebody that's going to excite me when I sit down and watch them play. And they can't be, as Shane said, like a favorite. I mean, that's just no fun. You want to have a little bit of an underdog attitude. And then I think finally, Shane, the uniform has to be cool. Right? It has to be a cool uniform. And even better if the floor is cool. I don't want to watch a team on a terrible floor half the year. So you got to have at a minimum a cool uniform, and let's hope that the floor is at least just kind of neutral, so it's not bothering me while I'm watching them.
Well, certainly that's a lot of criteria. I mean, like Shane said, there's not a lot of teams to pick from here, and you've pretty much laid out everything. So I guess I've only got two really. Tulsa, I think is too obvious because we've already talked about them, and everybody's kind of on the Tulsa bandwagon. And I know you're already on there, but you don't want to plant your flag for Tulsa quite yet. I think the move is Temple, and I think the reason is because if you don't love Fran Dunphy and that sad droopy mustache, he kind of looks like the Lorax. You can't love anybody. Fran Dunphy is terrific. Like I said, they may not play as up-tempo as maybe a team you're looking for, but like I said, their guards are going to score a lot. DeCozy can really shoot. Cummings can really get to the basket. They're both going to kind of be, taking off, chomping at the bit, really, to get out there and score. I think if Anthony Lee was still on this team, we might even be talking about them as, a potential title contender, or at least a conference title contender. Mm-hmm. They've got the classic uniforms. I mean, Temple's been around forever. If you don't like the Philly basketball atmosphere, then you really haven't been following college basketball at all. And I think they've got some transfers. Jalen Bond from Texas is going to be big. Jesse Morgan from UMass, who is another guy who's like 32 years old. He's like the Steve Logan of the current AAC. They've got a ton of pieces. College basketball is more fun when Temple is good. They're not great at football. Nobody cares about them in football. But they've got this random college basketball pedigree in no small part because John Chaney was such a great coach and such a great personality too. So I know that they're probably a long shot in the grand scheme of things, but I'm telling you, if Temple makes an NCAA tournament appearance or even comes close to sniffing an NCAA tournament appearance, I think that you'll find them appointment viewing for college basketball by the end of the season.
Well, that's a good nominee.
Shane, that was one hell of a pitch, man. This guy knows something about sales. I think I'm almost bought in. It's too bad this is only the first Podblast we've done, or I might be ready to sign on with the Owls right now.
Yeah, this is pretty good, pretty convincing.
Yeah. That's really my only shot, right, is to try to get you to sign now before you go do the other Podblasts with other people. Yeah. I mean, you don't want to these guys in the other conference, they don't know what they're talking about. Full's the way to go.
All right, Michael, let's just wrap with this. Give me one bold prediction. Could be a player, could be a team, could be anything. One bold prediction for the American for this season.
I think that Memphis flops, and I think Josh Pastner gets fired. And I think that's because the backcourt is not very good, and he's tried to save his job now by hiring an assistant coach who basically has like an assembly line of 5-star sons down the road here. But he hasn't proven anything there. He's been there for a couple years. Memphis's fan base is kind of accustomed to competing for national championships. I think they're going to finish 4th or 5th in this conference, and Pastner's going to get fired.
Very interesting. All right.
That's a great one. Yeah.
That'll do it for the American Athletic
Shane,
Conference.
I don't get to do one?
Oh, you got one too? I was gonna save you from the embarrassment of what will surely be a very wrong call, but if you want to go, Randy, then be my guest.
Oh, well, I was gonna say that Cincinnati's going to be unbeaten by the time we get to, December 1st. But what I was really going to say is, your boy Sam Cassell Jr., of course, a former. I know Shane why you know about him, and Mike as well.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, he's a former Maryland guy.
We don't talk about that, okay? We don't talk about it.
Well, here's what he's going to do as a member of the Huskies. He's going to march into Memphis on February 19 at the FedEx Forum, and they're going to win. And they're going to win on a ridiculous three-pointer that he hits. And he's going to do his old man's big balls dance all the way down the court, into the tunnel, into the locker room. And the media's going to ask him something about the environment, and he's going to say, it was okay, but it was more like a wine and cheese crowd. And for
how am I, good thing I went... It's a good thing I went first, because how am I supposed to? I would have just shut it down at the end of that.
Yeah.
Well, Randy,
that's what's going to happen.
I was making fun. I hope now that prediction becomes very true. I very much hope that becomes true. All right. That'll do it for the American Athletic Conference preview. Mike, thanks so much for joining us as always.
Of course. Thanks for having me on.
Of course, you could read Mike's work on the American microsite and all that other great stuff on rushthecourt.net. It's a blog I like.